Hello and welcome back to the Little Craft House. If we haven't met before, my name is Nicole and I like to show you guys all different ways of making polymer clay earrings that are simple to make and really fun to wear. This year is absolutely flying by, which means that Christmas will be here before we know it. But first we have to get through Halloween. Now, Halloween isn't really a huge thing here in Australia, although it is getting bigger every year, but it's still not really something that me or my family celebrate as such. But that being said, I do love any excuse to make a themed pair of earrings and play around with some colours that I wouldn't normally use together. So you can see me here conditioning up some polymer clays to use for today. So I rummaged through my stash just to see what colours I already had in packets. And this orange one here is from Primo Orange. The greeny coloured one is Citron. I think that's a souffle, if I remember correctly. We've got some black poppy seed, which is also souffle. The purple is from the Fimo Professional range. And I'm pretty sure that's just called purple. I also have some yellow gold glitter. Now, I wasn't 100% sure if I was going to use that one or not. I like the idea of having a little bit of sparkle and a little bit of something different in the colours that we're using today, but I wasn't sure how it was going to look. But I ended up including it anyway, and it ends up looking great. So as usual, I'm just conditioning up the clays, getting them all soft and workable. So I'm using my acrylic roller because that way it won't stick as badly as if I was using like a wooden one. I'm working on my ceramic tile. My tile is a little bit textured and it's a matte finish one. A lot of people like to work on the gloss finish tiles. I just like this one mainly for filming purposes because it's not got that really bright white on the screen, but the little bit of texture doesn't actually affect the polymer clay anyway, so we're all good there. Just thought I'd talk about that because I do get a lot of questions about the tile that I use. Anyway, I am rolling and folding with this clay, getting it all nice and soft. Now this Fimo Professional one I have already preconditioned because that takes a little bit more to get workable, but I really like the finish of Primo Professional. But yeah, it does take a little bit longer, so I've preconditioned it slightly earlier so that it is nice and soft and ready to go. Now this yellow gold glitter is a little bit firm as well. It's been pre-cut in those cubes for some time now and not wrapped in plastic, so it is a little bit firmer. And I tend to find that the clays with glitters in them are a little bit harder to condition as well. I think it's because there is so much glitter in it, there's not as much base clay, so therefore it's not quite as easy and as soft as what the pure colour ones are. If you find that you've got some glitter clay and it's quite crumbly, you can always try adding a little bit of translucent into it, and that can help to add a bit more of the base clay and therefore makes it a little bit easier to condition and a little bit more workable. This one, however, ended up conditioning down quite quickly and quite easily as well. I thought I was in for a little bit more trouble than what I ended up with, so we're all good there. Okay, so now I am going to grab my most favourite tool, which is my clay extruder. And I'm going to choose the disc, which is the small circle. So this one just here. Right, if you've never used an extruder before, I can definitely recommend getting one that's like this one where it's a twisty end rather than a push type. I find the push type are really strenuous on your hands and can be really hard to use. The twisty one can sometimes be a little bit hard to use as well, but it is definitely easier than the push type. So I'm just going to roll my clay out into a long piece, probably a little bit long, that one, and then put it into the tube of the extruder. I'm just going to push it down, going to pop the cap on, or pop the disc in rather, and then pop the cap on, making sure that it's on nice and tight. All right, and then I'm just going to start winding the end and then just winding it until it all starts coming through. Okay, so while I extrude out all of my colours and get this all nicely prepped, I thought I would talk to you guys about the technique that we're going to be doing today. So I hope I get the pronunciation right, but it's called the Bello technique. If you haven't heard of it before, or you may have heard of it before, it actually originates, I'm pretty sure it originates from needlework embroidery. And of course, as creative crafters that we are, this technique has been adapted into many other forms of craft over the years, which includes things like quilting and cross stitch and paper craft, and lucky for us, polymer clay. So to create this Bello effect, we are going to work through a few different steps. So it may seem a little bit overwhelming to start with, but honestly, we're just going to work through step by step and we're going to get to the end result, which will look amazing. So the very first step, which I've been doing, is extruding all of these strands, and they're going to give me equal portions of these colours. Now, if you don't have an extruder on hand, what you can do is just roll out your colours into equal size pieces and then use a knife or blade to cut some stripes, because our first part that we're going to create is a striped effect. So I like to do the extruder because all my lines will then be of equal size, but of course if you don't have one, just use your knife and then you can cut the slices from your clay that way. Okay, so I've got some additional black clay as well, which is going to become the base of my first slab that we are creating. So you don't have to use a base piece, but I do just to give it a bit more stability. So again, I just need to condition out this piece of clay. So just going to roll and fold it until it is nice and soft and ready for us to use. I am also going to just pop it through the pasta machine, and I'm going to do it on the thinnest setting so that way it's nice and thin, and we don't really need it chunky. We just need it there to base our stripes that we're creating onto. So I'm just going to trim around the edges as well, which is just going to give me some nice straight lines to use. I'm going to obviously pop these black bits to the side because I can use them again later. They're not going to waste or anything. So just going to trim it down, making it all nice and even. And when it comes to using clay for a base, I always like to check both sides and put the ugliest side facing up, because we're going to put stuff over the top of that. If there was any imperfections or things, anything. This clay is straight up the pack, so there's no colour transfer on it or imperfections, so it didn't really matter which way I put it. Okay, now we're going to start our stripes. So I'm just going to use each one of these strings that we've extruded and going to place them one at a time next to each other onto that base clay. And as I mentioned before, if you had cut your clay, obviously you would then just use your cut strips to then make these stripes. As I lay each colour down, I'm just gently pushing it against the previous one, and that's mainly just to keep it straight and keep it just slightly tacked on to each other. I don't want to put a lot of pressure on them at the moment. If you put too much pressure on, it's going to maybe flatten bits and not other bits and distort it, and it's not going to look quite as perfect as what we want. So just a little bit of pressure. A little bit of pressure also means that if I put the wrong colour down, or I need to change something, or it didn't go down quite straight, I can just easily lift it off without it being attached to that base clay properly. So we will roll over the top of it afterwards to adhere it fully, but at the moment I'm just putting that little gentle bit of pressure just to hold it in place. At the start I also wasn't sure whether I wanted to use that gold or not, but I did, and I think it matches in really nicely, so I'm glad that I did include that colour into it. Okay, so the stripe is done. First step is done, so I'm just going to cut off that little bit of excess there. And now I'm happy with all the positioning, so I'm just going to put a little bit of baking paper on the top. That will help to stop any of the stripes lifting, and I'm going to just use the roller to apply some pressure. So I'm not actually rolling as such, I'm just rubbing it. And make sure you do this in the direction of the stripe. You don't want to go against the stripe because, again, the colours might distort and go over into each other. We want to try and keep them as straight as we can. So that looks fantastic. And I actually really like this stripe just as is. So what I'm going to do is trim the edges first because we don't want any of those scrappy bits to be accidentally cut into our pieces afterwards. So I'm just going to trim these bits off, and I'm going to put them to the side because I might find something to use them for afterwards. I don't know what yet, but I might find something. And because because I like it so much, I'm just going to cut it in half. I'm going to keep half the slab as a stripe and put it to the side and cut some pieces out of that. And then we're going to use the other half to create that Bello technique. Now, for some reason, my clay is being really tricky and doesn't want to lift up. And I'm trying to be so cautious because I don't want to move those stripes and make them wibbly wobbly. So I'm just trying to be as careful as I can. I think I obviously pushed a little bit too much pressure on them and it adhered to the tile a bit much more than what I would have liked it to. But that's okay, it worked fine. There we go, just straighten those edges. And they both look equally as good, so I'll just chuck one of them to the side to use afterwards. And then we'll use this one for doing our Bello technique. Okay, so do what I say and not what I do is a tip that I've got coming up next. I should actually be using a rigid blade, so like a firm straight blade. Instead, I'm using my flexi blade, which moves and is bendy. So I realized as I'd started that I forgot to change my blades over. But yeah, it just made it a little bit more difficult for myself. So what I'm doing is cutting very thin little strips from that stripe and then tiling them down next to each other. But as I'm placing each one down, I place it in the next position along so that each colour starts to move as the slab is created. Does that make sense? I hope you can see what I'm doing and hopefully that makes sense. So it starts to create a bit of a zigzag pattern. So each colour will move down one position or move up one position as we go along. And just how I was mentioning the blade before, you can see how it's actually bending as I'm placing these pieces down, which actually means that my stripes or my sections aren't quite as straight as what they should be. So I'm quite annoyed at myself that I didn't go along and change my blade over. Right, so there we go. That is the Bello technique, and that just looks absolutely amazing. I'm so happy with how that has turned out. Again, I'm just going to put that baking paper on and give it a slight little rub, just kind of around, and not putting too much pressure on, but enough just to secure all of those pieces into position. And this pattern is funky enough. I don't think I need to do any fancy shapes. I'm just going to go purely with a hollow circle. So I want to make sure that I cut these pieces even so that both shapes mirror each other, because it would drive me insane if I didn't get the positioning right. So it's only going to make one pair of earrings because of the shape I've chosen. But if I'd chosen a different shape, I possibly could have got a few more pairs out of this little slab. And once again, I was too busy concentrating on lining up, I forgot about the internal circle. So when I cut my hollow shapes and I cut an internal cut, I like to leave my outer cutter in position because I find that it just holds the shape much nicer, so it doesn't push it out and distort it at all. So I'll just put the cutter back in over the top of that one and then position that central cutter and cut that centre bit out. And doing this shape is also a bit of a bonus because I'm going to use that internal circle as the topper for these pieces as well. And I will come back and use the rest of this slab for some more shapes afterwards. But for now, I'm just going to release these ones off the tile and pop those circles out. Yeah, I will come back and cut out any additional pieces that I can fit in that scrap because obviously I don't want waste and it is an amazing pattern, so I want to get the most out of it. Okay, so these pieces are looking absolutely amazing. Just going to clean my tile so that we're looking at a clean tile, not a dirty one. But I want to do one more thing to make them really stand out and really pop. I'm going to use some of this extra extruded clay to give them a border. And I think it's just going to really add an extra element to them and look really good. So just like that, I'm going to wrap it around and then just need to even off that end because it was a little bit tatty. And then just close that little gap there. And then I'm just going to cut a smaller piece to do the internal of the circle as well. Now, the internal's always a little bit tricky, and for some reason today this just did not want to play well with me. It just was being very, very difficult. You'll see my struggle in a second. So firstly, I didn't cut it right. I should have actually angled the knife into the middle of the circle, not to the outer bit where my pattern is for starters. I then, for some reason, cut it a little bit too short, so it doesn't really want to match up nicely. So I'm just going to put this into fast speed because I fiddled around trying to get these internals right because they were not behaving themselves. They just were not doing what I wanted them to do. I'd either cut them too small, too long, the join wouldn't join, they kind of moved out of position how I had them. They were just being right little annoying things, but I did get there eventually. But I just thought I would put it into fast motion here so that you don't have to see me struggle quite so much. And this ball tipped tool that I have, it actually came in quite handy because I was able to sort of run it around and smooth those join marks, and yeah, it worked quite well in applying that bit of pressure as well. So with this one I started with the internal and it behaved itself a lot more than what the other one did. So into the oven they go. I'm going to cook them for 45 minutes to an hour at 130 degrees. And so whilst that's baking, we're going to go on with cutting our striped slab. So I was thinking I might do some hearts for this, and I was thinking possibly doing like a double heart like that. And originally I was thinking I might outline these ones too, but I think I'm just going to leave them as the stripe. So I'll do them as a double stack with probably just a hook on top, just so it has a very simple top on it. Yeah, I might change my mind once they're baked, but I think that is the plan so far. So I want to make sure that I line both of these hearts up as well so that they are symmetrical, the same on both sides. So I'll just get that lined up. And I'm thinking that those top hearts will have to be cut from the side there. I'm not sure if there's going to be enough room on the top here, but we'll have a look and see if they'll fit. Oh, it actually does fit. Fits in that little gap there, so that's perfect because then that leaves the side bit free for me to cut something else out of. Okay, so I actually had a play around with a few other shapes to cut in that section, but the area that I've got left wasn't big enough for any of the shapes that I wanted. So I'm just going to cut another couple of hearts out. I've got a couple of ideas of things I might do with them, but I probably won't finish these ones today. I'll just pop them to the side. I'm thinking I might make some additional teardrops or something to hang from the bottom of them. Or there's another shape that I might layer them with. So I don't think I'll do that today for this tutorial, but I've cut them out. I'll get them baked up and then I'll deal with them later. I might make it into a reel or a shorts or something with that other extra design. Okay, so the scraps. I thought I would just do a very quick time lapse of stacking these scraps up together just to make an additional little slab. I'll cut some pieces out of this again later, but just wanted to show you how to use those scraps to create an additional pattern. Okay, so my pieces are all baked up, fresh out the oven, but I have gone ahead and drilled some holes in them already. So I do apologise that I didn't film that process. I'll let you know though, I do have a electric Dremel drill and it has a small drill bit attachment which is about 1.5 millimeters thick, and that's the size of the hole that then creates. So as I did mention before, I made some additional pieces, so those little toppers, and I just did some plain circles with a border around them as well. I thought it could be kind of interesting maybe to set that little topper on top, making it a large stud style earring. I thought that could be something a little bit different but still coordinates with the other ones. And I've also got those little pair of hearts there which I'm going to do something with later. Right, so that now brings me to the assembling stage. I am just going to glue these toppers onto that base piece. Of course, I could have attached them whilst they were raw and used liquid clay, or I could use liquid clay now and rebake, but I find that just using my E6000 glue will be sufficient. Like, I won't need to do anything else to it. Really easy, just gluing the two pieces together. Then once it's dry, I'll be able to glue the studs on the back for these ones as well. So just popping them on like that. And I am just going to grab my pressing plate that I've got to the side here, and I'm just going to balance these on the top of that pressing plate just so that that top piece doesn't sit, like fall down, so that way there it's level, because at the moment it's kind of weighted wrong. So I don't want them to, I want the glue to be able to set so that they are even and level without it kind of moving, if that, do you know what I mean? I think you know what I mean. Right, so I'm just going to pop them there. And then whilst they are drying, I am going to now assemble the rest of these pieces. So usually when I'm assembling, I'll use 8mm jump rings. Today I'm going to use the 10mm. And the main reason that I'm doing that is because having the border around the outside of my circles, my drill hole is down further than what it would normally be. Because if I drilled it the normal sort of distance down, it would be right where that join of the border and the circle is. So there is more of a distance between the two sets of holes. So by using the larger jump ring, it should sit better. So I'm just going to slot that on like that. The backs of my pieces are actually a little bit dusty from the board where I was doing the sanding, but I'll give them a wipe off with an alcohol wipe afterwards and that will clean that up. Alright, there we go. So that one looks good, and that was just the perfect size for the jump ring. So now I'll do the other one, and then I'll go on to assembling the hearts, which I'll use the 10mm jump ring for that one too, just because there is still quite a distance between the two holes. Now this one here was actually a little bit tight, so I do manage to close up the jump ring, but I'm actually going to undo it afterwards. Just sand the top of that top border just slightly, and it'll just give a little bit of gap so that it has some free motion, free movement, because at the moment it's just that little bit stiff. And I am just using my knife here just to knock out a bit of clay that didn't quite come off before. I gave them a little quick sand with some fine grit sandpaper, but I just didn't quite get in that point there. So I just used the knife to clean that up a little bit. And then I just need to assemble the tops of these hearts. Now, originally I said I was going to use a hoop, but I changed my mind and decided, because they already have quite a bit of a drop on them, that I would just use the little ball stud. And I've got them in black, which matches perfectly. So I'll pop them on. Again, really simple to apply, just opening up the jump ring, sliding both the polymer piece and the little ball stud on, closing it up, and they are done. So no need for glue for those ones. Perfect. So they're pretty much ready to wear right now if I wanted to, which is always a good thing. Right, so these are now pretty much all done, just waiting for the glue to dry on those top circular ones, and then I'll also add some glue and glue some posts onto the Bello studs as well, so that those ones are done. And then I have myself a fun little collection of Halloween earrings. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you for joining me today, and hope that you've enjoyed going through this process with me to create these earrings. And I'd love it if you guys could like this video and also subscribe if you would like to see more polymer clay tutorials. So a huge thank you for joining me once again. I really do appreciate it, and I will be back next week with another tutorial. So I hope to see you then.